So now, ladies and gentlemen, live and in colour, it's Mr. Wayne Lovejuice.
The other day our producer Louis had a chat with an interesting chappie who said that the YouTube algorithms really aren't that happy. If a channel only broadcasts once a week, so we decided we could text ya whenever we've got a piece of news in our new book on the track extra. Hey Louis.
What is up, party people?
Oh, did you see why I dislike the younger generation so much? Louis, my dear boy, I'm very fond of you, but God, you're an irritant.
Are we not, they say, John? The rhythm, it's gonna get you.
That makes no sense at all. Anyway, I phoned up to tell you something exciting. Do you want to hear something exciting?
Always. Tell me.
There's another walrus in Scotland.
Another one?
Did I hear somebody say walrus?
Okay, that's overacting a bit, but yes, it's the fourth in 2 and a bit years. And it has been seen off the coast of the Scottish Isle of Mull. And it is apparently the biggest yet, and is described as being truly enormous.
Where was it sighted again?
Off the Isle of Mull.
Maybe we should take some time to mull it over.
You know, Louis, in the Victorian times, they used to believe that a person's mental and physical characteristics came from what he or she had experienced in their mother's womb. And like the whole story of the Elephant Man is supposed to have been because the Elephant Man, Joseph Merrick's mother, was frightened by a circus elephant when she was pregnant. I think your mother must have been frightened by an episode of Crackerjack. Crackerjack!
John, going back a step, young people don't need the Victorian era. It was awful. It was rife with colonialism, racism, white superiority, and if that wasn't bad enough, they didn't have Balenciaga shoes that are actually socks but are actually shoes.
What the bloody hell are you talking about? If anybody understands what he's talking about, can you please write it in the comments? But now let's go to the walrus. Well, the story for us at least begins on the evening of 28th of February. I was lying back in bed with Lilith and the dog, and suddenly my iPad went bing, and it continued to go bing for many hours to come and intermittently throughout the next day. I can't remember who the first person was who called me, but thank you to all of you. It's always better to have more people tell me stuff than less people tell me stuff, then I've got more of a chance not to miss it. But what happened was, according to Sky News, a huge walrus has been spotted sunning itself on Scotland's west coast. Creel fisherman Lorne McRae saw the Arctic animal basking in the winter sun on Cairn na Beag, a small island which is part of the Tresnish Islands in the Inner Hebrides. Marine conservation charity, the Hebridean Whale and Dolphin Trust, HWBT, described the walrus as massive after seeing photographs. HWDT, which has been monitoring wildlife for 25 years, said that Monday's sighting was the first record of a walrus on its database, meaning that it is significant for the region. The charity has asked anyone who encounters the animal to report the sighting on the Whale Track app to allow its movements and overall health to be monitored. I didn't even know there was such a thing as a Whale Track app, but I went to the website that I was linked to on this story, and I downloaded the Whale Trap app. You try saying that even when you're sober. The Whale Track app. The Whale Track app? The Whale Track app for my iPad. And although I'm having a little bit of problems working out how to use it, it does appear to be a very useful piece of software, and I've got a link to it in the show notes below. But the thing which I find most important is, remember that whereas walruses are supposed to be purely Arctic animals, this is at least the fourth to have turned up in British waters in the last couple of years. First there was Wally, that turned up on the west coast of Ireland, moved to Wales, then to Cornwall and France and Spain, back to Cornwall after a while in the Scilly Isles, where he caused an awful lot of damage, and then after coming back to South Wales for a few days, went back to Ireland and was last seen heading north past Iceland. Then of course there was Freya, the ill-fated and poor sad Freya. Now the thing is with Freya, she was first found, I believe, off the coast of the Netherlands, where she made herself at home, spending a lot of the time basking on the front deck of a Dutch submarine. She then ended up in Britain, and then sadly went into the Baltic, ended up in Oslo, and that was where she was shot because the Norwegian police and authorities did not know how to control their crowds properly. I think this is a disgusting blot on the face of an otherwise relatively civilized nation. Then there was the third one, Thor, who in the last few days of last year turned up on a beach in Hampshire and ended up spending the new year on the beach and the I can't remember what you call them, the thing that you pull boats out of the water on, in Skegness. And in total contrast to the way that the Norwegians behaved, we welcomed Thor with open arms, and the people of Skegness even cancelled their New Year's Eve fireworks display and in order not to frighten him. How did Thor repay them? Well, he lay back on the slipway, I think that's the word, on the slipway, and had a crafty J. Arthur before going back north again. The last time I've heard of him, he was actually in Iceland again and was heading north. And now we have a fourth one. This one has not, as far as I'm aware, been named, and at the moment there's only the one account of him, although the photographs are very impressive. I shouldn't call him a him because I don't know what sex he or she is, so they are an undoubtedly impressive creature. But is this the beginning of walruses making Britain a regular visiting post on their journeys? And if so, how long will it be before a mummy walrus and a daddy walrus turn up somewhere, hopefully isolated, and show each other they love each other very much, and we suddenly have a colony of breeding walruses in Britain? I think that would be absolutely fantastic. I don't know about you guys, but if you do have any different ideas, please put them in the comments. But that's the story of the latest walrus. And now let's go over to Richard, because he has something he wants to talk about. Well, ladies and gentlemen, here we are back again, and once again I have as my guest my dear friend Richard Freeman, who is sitting looking a bit like Ivan the Terrible wrapped up in a wolf skin. says it's not a wolf skin, it's made of nylon and I bought it on Amazon. But Richard Freeman, dear sweet old friend of mine and one of my most valued colleagues, wants to tell you all about Pierre Denys de Montfort.
The reason I'm beneath this is that John's house is like a meat locker. It is cripplingly cold. So I have to wear this to stop myself shaking like a shitting dog. Anyway, Pierre Denys de Montfort. You probably won't have heard of him because he's been pretty well expunged from the scientific record by the clique of mainstream science. He was born in 1766 and he died in 1820. He was a mycologist, or an expert on mollusks, and in the latter part of the 18th century he was one of the most celebrated biologists in the whole of Europe. He worked for the Natural History Museum in Paris and for the Botanical Gardens. He wrote a number of books on mollusks, and he was sent on expeditions as far afield as Egypt, collecting all sorts of specimens. Now, his downfall began when he started to talk to whalers from Nantucket who had moved to Paris. And they told Pierre Denys de Montfort of some of the things they'd seen whilst hunting sperm whales, including great sucker marks on the carcasses of sperm whales and dying sperm whales that had vomited up enormous tentacles. And he postulated the existence of the giant squid decades and decades before the first one was actually secured. The first specimen was actually secured in the 1850s, and he thought that the giant squid could possibly be responsible for the legends of the kraken in Norse mythology and some sea monster sightings. He postulated that there were two kinds of kraken. There was the giant squid and the giant octopus. Now, when he published his theories on this, he almost instantly, overnight, became a scientific pariah. He was cast out by the scientific community. He lost his job. He was forced into eking a living selling seashells. He lived in a hovel that had a gravestone for a door, and finally died of starvation in a Parisian gutter in 1820. In the 1850s he was proved correct when the first specimen of Architeuthis dux, the giant squid, was actually secured off the Azores, I believe. But he's never had his name rehabilitated. He's one of my scientific heroes, and it really makes me angry that he's been, well, first of all, that he was so abused by the scientific community, and that his contribution has been forgotten and brushed under the carpet by mainstream science. Here was a guy that worked out the giant squid existed decades before it was ever discovered. As far as I know, there's not even a picture of Pierre Denys de Montfort. Nobody even painted a picture of him. Don't know what he looks like. So I think what we should do, what would be brilliant, is if we could get his books back into print and translated, and to dig up as much information on him as we can and make a long documentary about his life, his work, and how he was correct about the giant squid. He was the prophet of the kraken, and there should be statues of him and paintings of him in natural history museums all over the world, and there's nothing, and this needs to change. The world needs to recognise Pierre Denys de Montfort and what he did.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's about it from me and Lilith for this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. I want to say a very big thank you to Richard Freeman, to Louis, and to V. McQuinnan, but for whom this show would not have been made. I want to say a big thank you to my old friend Graham Inglis, who, as well as being Deputy Director of the Centre for Fortean Zoology, a post he's held for well over a quarter of a century, he's also my carer, and that these days seems to mean that at least twice a week, sometimes more, he has to push me in my wheelchair around the labyrinthine corridors of various North Devon hospitals. I'll be back on Saturday. What am I going to be talking about on Saturday? Well, I'm not actually 100% certain, but I think it's very likely that I'll be handing the whole show over to Richard and Richard, the two Richards, Muirhead and Freeman, who are going to be discussing all sorts of jolly things from the pages of Flying Snake back in the day. And I think I'm going to just turn the whole show over to them. And then I'll be back next Wednesday. What am I going to be talking about on Wednesday? Well, again, I think it's going to be something with Richard and Richard, but I'll have to wait and see because I'm still not quite sure. So, assuming that you people are all going to be there to watch the show, I'll be seeing you.